Hello and welcome to another episode of Angry Activist. I hope everyone listening is doing well. Today is a very gloomy day for me recording this. This is actually my second time recording because the first recording I did, the audio got messed up, so love that for me. But yeah, before we get started today on today's topic, I really briefly wanted to touch on some news. And some news came out a while ago, but I still wanted to mention it. So basically, a federal judge ruled that the new DACA rules were invalid. So the new DACA rules were basically they weren't going to be accepting new applications, and DACA renewals were only valid for a year instead of two. And so I don't know if I've mentioned this before in my last podcast, but I am a DACA recipient, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. DACA should be restored since the DHS had served illegally when making these new rules. So, yeah, DACA should be restored, which is really great news. I really don't understand how that even happened, how the DHS head was serving illegally. But, I mean, what's done is done, right? And then we'll see how Biden handles the DACA situation and just immigration in general. We'll see what he does. I really don't know what to expect, to be quite honest. But yeah, I just wanted to share that bit of news with you all if you haven't heard, which I'm sure most of you should have heard. But yeah, anyways, today's topic is something that has been on my mind is the concept of power and privilege and who has power and privilege and what does that mean. So when I think about power and privilege, to me they're very similar and they kind of go hand in hand. And I wanted to take a look at the definitions for these words. Also, before I continue on, I do want to say I'm talking about privilege and power in the context of the United States and America, because I do think there's a different conversation to be had about privilege and power in the world, which I might touch on. But yeah, overall, I'm going to talk about it in the context of the states, okay? But anyways, privilege, power, is the capacity or ability to direct or influence the behavior of others or course of events. And so I think we all kind of have the same idea of what power and what privilege means, again, here in the United States. And the way I think about it, there is different levels, I think, to privilege and power, and there's different types of privilege. I think that in our lives there is a spectrum, and in some cases we may be more privileged than others, whereas in other cases we may not be as privileged as others. I think it really depends on the situation. But I do think that just being in the United States in general, we all hold a type of privilege and power. I mean, the United States is always considered to be a powerhouse, right? To be one of the most powerful countries in the world. And I have a lot of thoughts about that statement. But yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of luxuries that we don't think about, you know? I mean, most of us have access to technology and have access to a lot of things that just people in other countries just don't. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, on a global scale, is just the amount of privilege that us Americans, us people here in the United States have in comparison to people in other countries. So when I think about who we all kind of have the same picture of the type of person. So for me, it's a white man who is able-bodied, straight, cis, Christian, and rich, or well off, I should say. To me, that's the epitome of privilege and of power, and there's a lot to pick apart from this idea, right? And I want to touch a little bit on certain aspects of this epitome of privilege. And the first one I kind of wanted to hit on was white privilege. Now, I have met a lot of people who believe that white privilege is not a real thing, or they say that just that idea. It's quite interesting how most of the people who think this and who believe this are white. I have also met others who are not white who still believe that it's not real, but for the most part, it's white people who say that it's not. And it's just kind of disturbing to me and kind of crazy to think that these people are so blinded and can't see their own privilege. It's just insane to me, given everything that's going on in our history. How can you not think it's true or not believe it's true? Again, I think just people become so blinded, especially when they're in their own bubble. I think a lot of these people are the kind of people who say, I'm not racist, I have a black friend. You know what I mean? Those kind of people. Yeah, they're very in their bubble, with very like-minded people. And while I think that it's okay to surround yourself with people who think like you and who share the same beliefs and values as you, I think it's also important to be open and be around others who may not have the same values and beliefs as you. And I always try to, whenever I speak to people who I disagree with, I try to see it from their point of view. Even if their point of view is stupid, I still try. And I think a lot of people don't do that, and they just, especially these people who don't believe in white privilege, are like, it's not a real thing. It's racist. First of all, I don't even know if I want to get into this topic, but I don't believe you can be racist to white people. That's my opinion. Some people think differently. I just don't think that you can be racist towards white people. Can you discriminate against white people? Yes, I think you can. But I think racism involves a relationship of power. And I also kind of view it in the sense that white privilege stems from a legacy and a system of oppression and slavery. So if you look at our history, the English came and colonized the Americas, right? And they did just terrible things to the indigenous peoples here. You know, they took their land, they murdered them, and all these terrible things, because based on this idea that they were savages and they were just not educated in the way that the English were. And this idea that white people, particularly the English, were just right on everything, and that they were perfect and they were pure and they're civilized human beings, right? And so kind of same thing with slavery. They took these people who they viewed as being not intelligent as they are, and being, lesser than them, and using them for their own benefit. And even after slavery, we all know, we all went to school, the Jim Crow laws and the segregation and all these things. And what's so sad is that it's still a thing. It's still a thing. Racism is still very real and very alive, even after all these years, which is astounding and crazy to me. And I think what's even more crazy to me is the fact that race, this concept of race, is not valid in the sense that there's no biological differences between races. There's no, or what people call races, there's nothing different between me and a white person or me and a black person. There's no biological basis for race. But this was a concept that the white people have created, the colonizers. I'm not gonna, by white people, I mean like back in the day. So it kind of happened around the time of slavery, pretty much. And also when people started to notice that the poor black people and the poor white people were trying to come together and work together, they kind of started to give the white people, poor white people, privileges just because they were white. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, slavery itself was one of the things, but this separation and giving special privileges to the white people, like, come on, that's white privilege, if you ask me. And I think this time of slavery and trying to pull away the black and white poor communities and put them against each other was the intention. And so the whole idea of our whole history has been whitewashed as well. I mean, when I think back on my education in high school, it's crazy to me how whitewashed it was and how it's painted in this view that it had to be done, when it really didn't have to be done and happen in the way that it did. And the United States has done a lot of terrible things, not only on American soil, but overseas and in other countries. We've just done a lot of terrible things. And I think it's really important that we own up to those terrible things that our country has done. And I think a lot of people don't want to because of patriotism, and they're just so proud to be Americans, and there's nothing wrong with being proud of where you come from and your country. But I do think that we must acknowledge all the terrible things that our country has done. If we don't, then how are we ever going to learn, and how are we ever going to move forward if we don't own up to our mistakes? And to just, not even mistakes, it was just terrible, the things that have been done, both, again, here in the United States and in other countries. But anyways, trying to pull it back, racism stems from the idea that whites are superior, point blank. And when you look at white privilege, it's kind of the same idea that things are made for the white people, a white person. And I wanted to touch on representation as being part of white privilege. And when I talk about representation, I'm talking about seeing yourself being reflected in a positive light. So, growing up, when I think back on TV that I used to watch and just media in general, it was a lot of white people. And then when we had people of color, so black or Latinx people on screen, they were given roles that stereotyped us, you know, gang members, criminals, drug dealers, landscapers, maids, you know. And I think that as a young woman of color, to see your people be reflected in a negative light kind of sucks. Kind of sucks. It's like, dude, is this how the world views me and my people? And I think people really underestimate the power of representation. And I'm going to pull it back to racism and how in early Hollywood, I forget the name of the movie. It's like a super famous movie. And it had obviously had blackface, and they portrayed men as predators, and they portrayed black men basically as animals, and it really had an impact on the way that black men and black people in general were seen here in the United States. So the way that people are portrayed is very important. And let me just say this isn't just in the States. This isn't just something that happens in the States. I mean, I watched a lot of networks in Spanish, right? And even then, when I watched these soap operas, the women were light-skinned, blonde, and blue-eyed. And I was just like, well, I don't look like that. My family doesn't look like that. None of my friends look like that are Hispanic, and I remember just being so confused because I thought they were just white people who spoke Spanish. I mean, they kind of are, but I didn't see them as being Hispanic or being Latinx. I just saw them as being white people who just know Spanish. And I remember just being so confused, like, why are there so many white people in this soap opera? Like, I was just confused. And yeah, I think being able to see yourself in successful and positive roles can really have an effect on you, and not just on you, but on society, because subliminally they're giving us these messages that this is what this group of people is supposed to be like, or what they are like. And I think that's very dangerous. And I also wanted to talk about the fact that sometimes white privilege can be very little things. And one of those things is, for example, being able to go to the store and finding makeup that matches your complexion, or finding hair products that cater to your type of hair, or not being followed or looked at weird when you're in a store because the employees think you might steal, or you just, because of your skin color, look like a dangerous person. You don't have to worry about these things, and it may be little things to some people, but I think little things add up and they stack up to form a bigger picture. Another thing that kind of comes to mind is the fact that nicer, wealthier neighborhoods are primarily white. And I speak on this based on personal experience. So the county that I live in, we have some of the richest and some of the poorest people. And there's very specific towns and communities that are considered to be poor, and you can tell when you drive through these towns. One of the towns in particular is, actually, all of these poor towns are primarily black and brown. And it used to not be that way. In one of the bigger towns, it was actually primarily white until more black and brown people started moving in. And then obviously the white people fled. And it's not the same. It's not the same as when the white people were here. And it's crazy I've driven all over the county, and it's always crazy to me when I go from one town to another and just see stark differences. Even in the streets that are nicely paved in comparison to the streets that have potholes and just haven't been cared for. And it's just astounding if you just drive, a few minutes the other way, and there's a very clear divide of the rich and the poor. And it's just interesting to me how it's the black and brown neighborhoods who are forgotten and who are just not in good condition. And I took a look at some stats a while ago on the schools, and I remember I never played sports, but I had friends who played sports, and they would talk about the school in the rich neighborhoods and how they were huge and had all these different things. And we look back on the other schools who barely have decent books, and it's just no coincidence. And even when I look at the statistics of the school, I looked at the statistics. In the richer school, it was primarily white, and the few brown and black kids that they had were more likely to be suspended. They're more likely to be suspended. And it's crazy because when I think back on my experience in school, it was always the Hispanic kid. It was always the black kid that was getting in trouble for little things. But every now and then there was that one white kid who would get in trouble as well. But for the most part, it was the black and brown kids who would get in trouble for little things. And it's a pattern. It's not a coincidence to me. And when communities that are struggling finally succeed, something terrible happens. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, the Tulsa Race Massacre. This took place in 1921. So basically, it was a neighborhood and a community of black people, and they were very successful. They had their own businesses. The people were just very successful, right? And long story short, I think it was like a kid was accused of harming a white girl. Yeah, and so people heard that this black kid probably hurt this white girl or did something to her, and it kind of felt like an excuse to them to riot against this community because he did. He obviously knew that people were going to think that, and he fled to the community, and they kind of followed him there, and it just ended up very poorly. And they burnt down these businesses and left it in shambles. And there was always tension, right, between the white neighborhood and then the successful black neighborhood. And I believe that the city never fixed the community. They never restored or tried to restore the community after it was burnt down. And it's just crazy to me how they had no remorse. You know, people will always say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And I really hate that saying because I don't think people take into account the systems that are in place. If you're black, you're more likely to be arrested. Oh, and that brings me to another point. Interactions with police. I don't even think I have to say more. I mean, we all know this summer, you know, and every year we unfortunately see many brown and black men and women being murdered and being hurt by the people who are supposed to protect them. Even when they cooperate, their life is still in danger. And I can't imagine the fear of being pulled over, of potentially losing your life. Imagine having to teach your kids or tell your kids that the man or the woman who is supposed to be protecting you could kill you if they wanted to and get away with it. And I just can't imagine. And I'll be honest, I don't think white people really have to worry about that. I mean, obviously, if you don't cooperate, things are going to get messy. But when I think about the way black people who commit crimes and white people who commit crimes are portrayed and treated, it's very different. Very different. I mean, I'm sure you all remember the case with Brock Turner and how the media portrayed him as this white boy with ambition and potential who made a mistake. Let me tell you, that was not a mistake. That was a conscious decision that he made. But the media will say, oh, well, he made a mistake. He's a troubled kid. It's always the troubled kid. Now, I'm not saying that some people don't suffer with mental health issues or things like that, because there definitely are. But how come they're treated that way? But when it's a black person on the news or who commits a small crime, it's, oh, this criminal, blah, blah, blah. You know, they just treat them like they're animals and like they're a criminal, like they're not even a human being. And it's, even when the most horrific of crimes are committed, they're still treated with humanity. And it's like, why can't we treat black people the same way? Why can't officers do that? And people will say, oh, it's just a few bad apples. Well, that's a whole lot of apples then. So yeah. Anyways, kind of straying away from the topic of white privilege, I think that it's still something, it's a very real thing, but it's just mind-blowing how many people just don't believe it's a real thing. And so, aside from white privilege, I also wanted to talk on the privileges of being straight and being cis. So, kind of similarly to white privilege, I think when you're straight and you are cis, so you don't have to worry about a lot of different other things. I go to this one bathroom, you know, and I just think there's so many people who are just assholes. If you ask them to refer to you as a certain way, as a certain pronoun, they will be like, oh, well, biologically you're a woman or biologically you're a man. And they just will refuse to address you by the way that you want to be addressed and referred to as, you know? And kind of similarly, again, with white privilege, being a part of the LGBTQ plus community really puts people at risk, because there's a lot of people with hate in their hearts who don't have an issue with killing or hurting people who look different than them. And it really sucks because, why shouldn't you be able to present yourself the way you feel and dress the way that you like? Because it's not hurting anyone. And if people are comfortable with it, then be uncomfortable. An instance that kind of comes to mind when I'm talking about this is, at one of the colleges that I attended, we had a gender neutral bathroom, and it was located in a certain area of the school, and it got vandalized. And I remember just being like, why? Do you really hate others that much to vandalize a space that is most likely a very safe space for them to be in, a place where they feel safe? And people are like, why do people need safe spaces, blah, blah, blah. And, how would you feel if your home wasn't a safe space? How would you feel if you felt threatened when you were at home? And I just remember just being like shocked that someone really took the time out of their day to go to the gender neutral bathroom and vandalize it. And I could be wrong, but I believe that the school didn't really follow up on that. I don't think that they tried to find out who did it. I could be wrong. I don't know. I didn't hear anything about that. And I have a pretty good idea of who the people or person that did this was. And I think a lot of people have an idea of the group of people that did this was. We all pretty much think it was the conservative group on campus who did it. They're very open about who they are and the things that they believe in, and they're not very, LGBTQ plus friendly. So if you are straight and cis, you don't have to worry about the way that people look at you or being safe. I know there's people who are scared to come out or say things about their sexuality or their gender, even with their own family. And it's crazy. That's another thing. If you want to have kids, but if you won't love them the way that they are, then don't have kids. Why would you have a kid if you're going to disown them if they want to dress the opposite gender? Just don't have kids if that's how you view life. That's how you view people. But yeah, that's another privilege, I think. Another one that I kind of wanted to briefly touch on is religion. I personally don't know anything about religion because I'm not religious. I get Catholic and Christian confused. I feel like people explain it to me all the time, but I still get confused. Partially because I don't practice any religion, so I don't really care. But I respect other religions, believe in what you want to believe. But obviously, there are certain religions that are discriminated against, and we've seen a lot of hate crimes, unfortunately, occur at places of worship. And it sucks. I can't imagine believing in something and feeling like you could be killed or harmed because of what you believe. I think it's also just stupid. It doesn't make sense. Like, let people believe what they want to believe, unless they're doing something that's harming other people. But otherwise, just mind your business. No one's religion, sexuality, gender should matter to you if it's not hurting you. It just surprises me how many people care about other people's lives in the way that doesn't affect them. Just mind your business. Yeah, I kind of wanted to briefly touch on religion because I do think that particularly Christian and Catholic people have privilege in the way that they're some of the most popular religions and are seen as normal. You can't see, but I'm using quotation marks around the word normal. Yeah, again, personally, I don't practice religion. I don't care for religion. I respect people's beliefs, but don't ever try to shove them down my throat. And don't hate on people because of what they believe. It's just a belief. It's just a belief. Get over it. And another thing that pertains to privilege and power as well is money, being rich, being wealthy. The rich and the wealthy control a lot of things that we are not even aware of. Take politics also as an example. There's a lot of corruption, I think, in politics. And, we've heard it before. These big corporations fund politicians, and it's kind of a silent exchange in the way that these corporations approach a politician and say, hey, I'll fund your campaign, I'll give you money for your campaign, but I want you to cut taxes for me, or I want you to lessen regulations so that I can pollute the earth, but make billions of dollars. And it sucks because then these politicians are not working for us, the people who elected them in the first place. They're working for the interest of these corporations who are harming mostly our communities and who just have terrible practices. And yeah, they control laws and things that dictate our everyday life. And I think oftentimes they are also able to get away with a lot of different things. And yeah, they're able to get away with a lot of different things just because they're rich. They have enough money to bail themselves out of whatever situation they're in. And whereas if a poor person were in their position, they would probably spend their life in jail. I just think that's kind of messed up. We shouldn't let things slide just because they have money. They should pay the price and face repercussions for whatever it is that they did. But, I mean, we've all heard it with money equals power, right? Money equals power. The ability to influence others and events. It's crazy. You dangle money in front of a person and they'll do whatever. They'll do whatever. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the main privileges that I thought of. There's definitely a whole lot more. There's a whole lot more to talk about, but I don't want to spend 2 hours talking about it. And so with all this being said, all these topics talked about, I do think that we do tend to focus on the negatives, on negative things. So we might focus on the fact that we don't have certain privileges or we don't have certain power, right? And recently I attended this leadership forum and the speaker talked about power and privilege in Latinx communities. The speaker also made us just think about our places. And by that I mean, some of us may not realize it, but we can be in positions where we have a certain amount of privilege and a certain amount of power. And the speaker told us to just think about that and think about also what we're doing with that privilege and power. Because I think there's a lot of people who use their power and their privilege for self-benefit, right? And I think it's the culture and my community that kind of influences me to think that we're all in this together. I know that sounds super cheesy, but basically that we all need to help each other to get ahead and create a better environment, a better community. We need to help each other. And oftentimes, the way I see it, in the United States, we have a very individualistic kind of perception, which I think is inevitable when we have a capitalist system. So people often just think about what's best for them or what's best for them and their immediate family, right? Instead of taking a look at the bigger picture, what's best for everyone, what's best for their community. And I think people just lack compassion for other people. There's a lot of people who just have no issue or no problem with stepping on other people and putting other people down in order to come on top. I mean, everyone wants to be successful, right? But right and a wrong way to do it. I think when you're stepping on other people and putting other people down, that's the wrong way to pursue success. I just think it's morally wrong, you know? I think but we do have a lot of people who are in places of privilege, of power, who only care about themselves. And it sucks because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we're all living on the same planet. Why do we want to kill each other? Why? When we could be creating a place where, we can all be successful and we can all live healthy, happy lives. And maybe that's too far out for some people, but that's ideally the kind of world I would want to live in. But yeah, just reflecting on what do we do when we're in these positions? Are we going to help or work for or with the oppressor or with the oppressed? And like I said before, I think that power and privilege comes in many different forms and there's many different types. So I encourage you all to kind of reflect on that. For example, for me, I'm privileged in the ways that I am a college educated individual. I've been able to pursue college and higher education. I am also pretty light skinned. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm white passing. I think you can definitely tell I'm not white. But I do have lighter skin and I'm an able-bodied straight woman. I am able to legally work. But in the same perspective, I am also underprivileged in other areas. I mean, I'm an immigrant and I'm a woman. So again, there's many different areas where you can be privileged in some, but not in others. And I highly encourage you all to think about that and reflect on that. So with that being said, I also encourage the listeners to reflect what they're doing with their privilege and what you're doing with your privilege and what you're doing with your power. As little as it may be, it makes a difference because little things add up, little things stack up. So I know this ending got a little bit corny with living in a world where everyone works together and creates a sustainable and successful society where everyone has equal opportunity and everyone can be successful without having to put others down. Again, some people might think that's far out, but I mean, to me, that's an ideal world. But unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. But yeah, I think that's it for today's podcast. There's a lot of things to think about and reflect on. And I hope you all enjoyed and hope that you got something out of this podcast episode. So, yeah, thank you guys for listening and stay tuned for another episode. I don't think I'll be uploading next week, but perhaps the week after. I'm approaching finals week, guys. It's hard out here, but I will be posting another episode uh, in the following days or weeks. So, yeah. Hope you guys have a good one and stay safe